the session is from chaos to control. I think the previous speakers were very controlled using the typical background for the slides. I'm going to do it a little bit different. These are my disclosures, and as Neil said, we are co-founder of the International Fluid Academy. My talk will be especially about breaking bad habits that actually happen every day in your ICU. I would like to focus on the 4 Ds of fluid therapy, the 4 questions, 4 indications, and the 4 phases. And we will run through each of them. So we start with the 4 Ds of fluid therapy, and you may recall voting questions, so we will revote this question at the end, so pay attention. The first D stands for drugs, so we should treat fluids as any other drug we give to the patient, like antibiotics. The dose is equally important. If you want to give a bolus of fluid, you may give 4 ml per kilo in 10 to 15 minutes. Maintenance fluids, we may give 1 ml per kilo per hour. So there are some specific doses that we should adhere to. Duration is equally important, and we should stop fluids when the patient is taking oral fluids or is drinking again, and stop maintenance solutions. And at some point, patients will accumulate fluids, especially if they've been given isotonic maintenance solutions, and then they may need a little help in de-escalation or de-resuscitation with diuretics. So the 4 questions dealing or regarding fluid therapy. First question being, when should I start IV fluids? Of course, because the best fluid is probably the one that has not been given to the patient unnecessarily. So the next question, if you decide to start at some point, you must stop giving fluids. In some patients, as I told you, fluid balance may be positive, and it may be appropriate to remove fluids, so to start removal, and that's what we refer to as de-escalation or de-resuscitation. And if you're removing fluids, of course, we must avoid hypovolemia, which carries an increased morbidity mortality. So at some point, we must stop fluid removal. There are only 4 indications for fluid therapy in the ICU. The first being resuscitation fluids, which is not the majority of fluids given to the patient, and these should save lives. So the next is maintenance. It's questionable whether they are needed because we are diluting our drugs or painkillers into fluids as well. Maintenance fluids should cover the daily needs if a patient is not able to have an oral intake. The daily needs for glucose, for water, for sodium, potassium, for electrolytes. And that's why in Belgium, because bartenders were aware of the Topmas trial already, when you have beer, which is a hypertonic solution, which would normally make you go to the loo more often, they add salty peanuts, making it a bit more isotonic, which prevents you from diuresing, so it stays at the bar, and it makes you more thirsty, so you drink more, and you go less to the loo. So it's a win-win for the bartender. So replacement fluids, they should mimic the fluid that is lost. So if you lose blood, you get blood. If you lose plasmolite, you could get plasmolite, but this does not happen. And gastrointestinal losses, maybe this could be an indication, because you can have alkalosis, to substitute with saline, which would normally induce hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. There is nothing normal about saline because I don't have 154 milliequivalents of chloride in my blood, and it would represent a lot of deaths of ships. The last indication being nutrition. We often forget that if we want to give caloric protein or calories, we must dilute this into an oral or an enteral solution. So nutrition may also be a cause of fluid overload, often overlooked. So what does the literature tell us about fluids in general and fluid stewardship? Let's go back to the early trials, and starting with the VICEP study, I think it was around 2001, followed by a couple of other big trials, and the first Fluid Academy being in 2011, so it was before these big trials. These trials created a lot of confusion, and people were not sure any longer whether to use colloids or crystalloids, or whether it was the balancing in the SPOLIT trial, and then albumin in the Albios trial, and now recently we had the SALT IT, so it tells you the SMART study looking at balanced solutions. So all this created some reaction, earthquake or volcano or a tsunami of reaction statements and counter-statements in the press, in the lay press, and the discussion is still going on. But the bottom line, I guess, is that if you want to save lives, it's probably not a good idea to give a hypertonic solution for resuscitation, as it may only remain around 10% intravascularly after 1 hour. Crystalloids may remain about 25–30% intravascularly, as we learned from the studies by Robert Hahn. And it's questionable, but I believe that colloids may remain 80% or up to 100% after 1 hour at least intravenously. So it depends where do you want your fluid to go. So how to deal in general with fluids in surgery and trauma? It's probably better to give balanced or blood when needed. Shelf life may be important, and it probably all comes down to fluid strategy rather than the actual fluid that has been given. And the same holds true in sepsis in the ICU. We should not give starches or gelatins, no saline, probably not. No hypotonic solutions to resuscitate. And maybe there may be a place again for balanced solutions in albumin, as we learn through this meeting. So the last four is the 4 phases. We know that sepsis kills around 258,000 patients in the US a year. When you look at the literature on fluids, it's often a mixture of science, politics, industry involved, and religion. Religion being like a battle between good and evil, between acid, base, pro-anti-inflammatory, and colloids and crystalloids, and balanced versus unbalanced. So in sepsis there is the 3-hour bundle from the Surviving Sepsis campaign, which was recently changed into a 1-hour bundle where we should give 30 ml per kilo in 1 hour. This may cause fluid accumulation or anasarca. The question is whether we end in a stage of complete and utter madness. Why would this be the case? Because if you would be a man living in the US and weighing 155 kilos, and if you don't get resuscitated with 30 ml, you go to high court for malpractice. But if you do give 4.5 liters, you also go to high court for malpractice because of fluid overload. So it's difficult times in the US, amongst other issues over there. If water is the problem and fluid overload, then maybe fluid removal or de-resuscitation may be a solution. Why is that? Because fluid overload has a tremendous impact on end organ function all over, and I would call this as a global increased permeability syndrome. Brings me to the 4 phases and the rose concept. So you all know when you give water to a rose, it starts blossoming, so it's the resuscitation, the optimization, comes the organ support, and we stabilize the patient. And at some point we may need to de-escalate and evacuate. So hence the 4 phases. So initially we save lives, fluid balance is positive, and this is after the first hit, but it could be sepsis, trauma, burns, pancreatitis, you name it. Fluid balance must be positive, then we optimize, stabilize with a neutral fluid balance, and then usually the patient removes the excess fluid that has been given in the evacuation phase, but some patients may need a little help, and of course we must avoid hypoperfusion. So hence the acronym ROSE, and I just have to point out that the last rose is not that patient is just a dry rose, still alive and kicking. Looking at publications on these different phases, it's difficult to find one single study that covers the whole dynamics of resuscitation, optimization, stabilization, evacuation. Some of the studies focus on the very early phase, like the feast and the rivers, and some focus on late stages. So how then to translate this to one single patient? Of course, we must never forget that septic patients initially are not hypovolemic, but they are vasoplegic. So maybe there may be a place for vasopressors, and maybe we should change our habits. I believe we can, and it may be time for fluid stewardship. All this is summarized in the latest review together with Monty and Todd Rice, who is the senior author of the SALT trials, where we propose fluid stewardship in analogy to antibiotic stewardship. A possible definition could be that it is a series of coordinated interventions introduced to select optimal fluid dose duration of therapy that results in the best outcome, prevention of adverse events, and could reduce costs. So it's about appropriate fluid management, prevention of adverse effects, and reducing costs for the hospital. So how do you do this? You start with a snapshot of your consumption, so you ask your hospital pharmacist. You do survey on the knowledge of fluids with your doctors, also test the nurses, and then you can do a medical audit where you look at the files and check for the appropriateness of the fluid prescription. So this is our case in the University Hospital in Brussels. So we're not surprised that the most prescribed fluid or used given fluid was saline, still in 2016, followed by plasma light. And as hypertonic solutions for maintenance, it's glucose and 0.45. And so then we started fluid stewardship. So we did a knowledge survey, and just to summarize that no one passed, or on average we did not pass. This was the best answer, which is the glucose content of plasma light, which is 0, so it's not a good maintenance solution. The sodium content of saline, we've had a question, so about half knew the right answer. What is a fluid bolus? 1/4 of the participants knew the correct answer, so the average score for doctors was 32, so they were sacked. The nurses had 50.3 because we were nice for the nurses when we meet them, so we changed the questions a little bit, and the nurses were okay. So, bottom line is, we are sacked. I guess that if you would do it in your unit, you would be sacked as well. And you may say that this is just fake news, it's not happening, it's not in my ICU, but I believe that if we choose the right targets in order to achieve the right goals, we may make a difference. And the goal being appropriate IV fluid management. And you can do this by fluid stewardship, as I showed you with a snapshot and a survey. Then we identified on each ward one nurse, one doctor as fluid stewards, who then were trained in a theoretical manner. They had teaching. We organized flyers and posters and screensavers, and we provide feedback and define key performance indicators. So it's a chain from physician prescription to pharmacy, the nurse prescribing to the patient. So this is just an example of the posters we put out on the wards and the flyers that we hand over to every doctor or every nurse, followed by a plan, do, check, act cycle. So what was the effect of this fluid stewardship program? If you look at the consumption overall of crystalloids, you see there is a decrease in saline, that's what we want. There was an increase in balanced solutions, a decrease in the hypertonic maintenance solutions, but not ready for the shelf, covering the daily needs, and an increase in glution, which is a ready from the shelf solution only available in Belgium, that covers the daily needs. We then defined as KPI, which is the ratio between the balanced solution versus saline, and you can see that now we almost get at 100%. Of course, this ratio should be much more, so that there is less consumption of saline, but at least the trend is good. And if we see at the ready from the shelf maintenance solutions, there is a nice increase over time. So the key to success here is to identify the nurse, the doctor. You also need people from IT, pharmacists, dietitians, because nutrition are also fluids, and a medical director. So you need to start with a core team, and as a doctor I think it's important, anesthetist, emergency physician, ICU physician, because those are the largest consumers of fluids. So these then tackle the medical director, and the medical director then urges everyone to fill in the survey and to implement fluid stewardship. So ladies and gentlemen, to wrap things up, I hope convince you about the importance of fluid stewardship and the 4 Ds, questions, indications and phases. Remember the 4 Ds is the drug, the dose, duration and the escalation. So the 4 questions is when do I start, stop, start removal and stop removal. Then comes to the 4 indications. Remember it's resuscitation, maintenance, replacement, and don't forget nutrition. The 4 phases, remember the ROSE concept, resuscitation, optimization, stabilization, evacuation. I think it's about time to start with fluid stewardship in your unit, your hospital, and on the regular wards. Start with looking what you're using, perform the knowledge survey, and then teach and train. Having said that, it's my pleasure to invite you to Campinas in Brazil for Fluid Academy Day later on in May this year. I thank you for your attention.